So what is EDGE? EDGE is a vibrant community of people from all backgrounds and walks of life who believe entrepreneurship can make a lasting change in society. We support changemakers as they explore entrepreneurial approaches to creating a more equitable and sustainable world. In collaborations with our partners, EDGE provides a new growing ventures with mentorship, learning programs, and support to access funding. EDGE is a gateway to shared innovation sources and offers physical and virtual communities where impact entrepreneurs can thrive. So we're going to start off with the land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather has been and still is the traditional territory of several indigenous nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, the Métis, and the Mississauga of the First Credit Nation. Since time immemorial, numerous indigenous nations and indigenous people have lived and passed through this territory. We recognize that this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and the Two Wampum Treaty, which emphasizes the importance of joint stewardship, peace, and respectful relationships. Sharon affirms that it's our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, and those who are here, and those who are yet to come. We are grateful for this opportunity to be and working on this land. So a quick Zoom orientation. Mute your mic if you're not speaking to ensure that any background noise is eliminated. Also, to introduce myself, my name is Tiana and I'm the Business Development Support Specialist here at EDGE. And I'm just here to help Geoff go through this session. If you have any needs in regards to any questions, you can use the chat function below, and as well, this session will be recorded. So this is our agenda today. We just did the welcomes and introductions. Geoff would be doing a quick Q&A, a presentation. And Sheridan, for those who don't know, or EDGE, sorry, is an entrepreneurship and discovery growth engine right out of Sheridan College. We empower those who connect creativity, innovation, and entrepreneurship. We strengthen the regional innovation ecosystem through collaborations and impact entrepreneurship expertise, while also providing inclusive support to impact entrepreneurs, while offering mentorship, learning programs, and co-working spaces. Lastly, we connect entrepreneurs to Sheridan's talents, expertise, and resources. So these are our programs where we engage with our entrepreneurs in hopes to build their ventures. The 4 programs we have are Explore, Leap, Rise, and Soar, where it starts from the ideation process to scaling your venture to ensure growth. And I would like to introduce our mentor today, Geoff, which is one of our EDGE mentors. He is a serial entrepreneur and is a graduate of Sheridan's College from the Computer Science Tech program. Today, Geoff will discuss challenges, share expertise, and answer questions around balancing the workload as a founder and explore the options available to fill gaps and save time. One quick fact before I give it to Geoff, he's actually fostering a cute dog. I don't know if it's still taking applications, but I know to you, Geoff.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And hopefully you don't hear from my co-host. He's currently looking out the window watching for dogs and squirrels and rabbits and raccoons and all the other wildlife where I live. I'm happy to have you. This is a very open, informal session. So if you have any questions or things that you'd like to focus on, I saw the message, Nick, thank you, understanding recruiting. So that's definitely something we're going to spend some time talking about. Before we dive into recruiting, I just want to talk about sort of skills gaps, and from a high level point of view, as an entrepreneur, if there's work that you don't have the time to do or don't have the skills to do, you basically have 3 options. You can hire employees to do the work for you. You can bring on a co-founder, which is someone that's actually part owner in the company with you, Or the last option is to hire a company, a contractor, or, so let's say, for example, it was building a website. You could hire an employee and get them to build your website. You could bring on a co-founder who may take care of all your technology needs, or you could hire a company to build. So those are the three big categories that we're talking about in today's session of building a team. So maybe I'd be quite happy if anybody wants to unmute themselves, but don't feel obligated. And I'm just seeing some of the messages that are coming in here. Why don't I dive in on what's involved in having an employee, and just from a high level walk through that process, if that's the direction that you choose to go down. In Canada and in Ontario, if you want to have an employee, which is an actual, like, there's a legal definition of having an employee, you need to register for a payroll number with the CRA. This applies whether you're a sole proprietor or a corporation or a partnership. Many of you here might already be registered for an HST number, and your HST number is, I believe, your business number RT0001 normally. If you are if you're have a corporate number, it's an RC number 0001. If you have a payroll number, it's an RP 0001. So you contact CRA, it's free. You register as a company that has payroll, that has employees, and they will give you, it'll be the same number you have, just a different suffix, an RP number. So that's all that's involved in registering. Once you're registered for payroll, then you have some obligations. When you go to hire someone, you do an offer letter, which is basically their employment contract. Unless you have a separate employment contract, they come and work for you. Every time you pay the employee, you have to deduct tax, CPP, and EI from their pay. You have to add some CPP and EI of your own and remit that to the government. So that's the payroll remittance. And CRA is very picky that you do that on time. There are very heavy fines if you don't do your payroll remittances. Most companies don't actually do payroll themselves. You can do it. There's an online website called the CRA Payroll Calculator. And when I first started my company, for the first, I think, 6 months, might even the first year, I used the payroll calculator manually, and figured out how much tax to take off, and then used online banking to send that to the government. So that's the basic process. I'm just checking the other questions here. The probation phase. So under the Employment Standards Act, if you terminate, there is no such thing as probation under the Employment Standards Act. If you hire someone and you let them go within the first 3 months, you do not need to pay them lieu of notice, meaning, this sort of 2 weeks notice. So there are specific requirements on how much notice you need to pay in the Employment Standards Act. So I would refer, you can model your probation policy. The reality in Canada is that an employer, assuming you don't have a union, an employer can let go of an employee at any time. And for any reason, as long as you don't violate their rights. You can just say, sorry, we don't need you anymore. So whether somebody's on a probationary period or not. Like if you hire somebody, you say you have a 3-month probationary period, they go 1 day past the probationary period, and you decide you don't want them anymore, you just let them go. Okay. There's no obligation to keep an employee because they passed the probationary period. You do have to follow the Employment Standards Act in terms of payment, but you always have to follow that.
Jed, this is Nick. Do you mind if I have a follow-up question right now, or do I hold them for later?
Go right ahead. I'd love to hear it.
Okay, Jed. So thanks for that clarity on that subject. Now, regarding the probation period, I think a lot of employers, my past employers anyway, have used that term in regards to 3 months. So can you better explain the consequences from the employer standpoint if you let go an employee past the 3-month period? Are you saying it's used as probation because there's a lack of we'll say severance afterwards, but it's not really it's a loose term?
So severance is a thing, and then there's what's called notice or lieu of notice. You would never be subject to severance because you have to have, I think, at least 50 employees. You wouldn't be big enough to owe severance. But in the Employment Standards Act, it's what's called notice. So traditionally, if you hire an employee, and let's say they worked for you for 2 years and you owed them 2 weeks notice, you could just say, hey, I'm laying you off in 2 weeks. They work for the next 2 weeks, and then your obligation to them is fulfilled. But as employers, when we tell somebody we don't want them to work for us anymore, we usually make it immediate, especially in my background, which is IT. I don't want, if I'm telling somebody, you never use the term you're fired, right? That's firing somebody for cause. You just say without cause, there's no reason, just decided it's not in our best interest, it's not working out. You just have to pay whatever lieu of notice is if they then walk out the door, because you don't want them. Do you really want someone who you've decided to fire because they're not good hanging around? It can be very toxic.
Yeah, totally understand. Maybe I'm getting conflicts in advice in terms of that. Now, I've been told, I've been doing a lot of research in the subject for a while, so hopefully I can have a very educated conversation with you right now. But I've been told by multiple people that it is difficult to fire somebody without cause, and there can be repercussions. And now I'm a little confused on when you mean lieu of notice. If we give them a 2-week notice, but you don't want them to be around, you're saying we can tell them to leave today, but we would
Yes.
owe them 2 weeks pay whether they work or not. Is that what you're trying to? Is that what
That's
you're confirming?
exactly it. Now, if they've worked for you for 10 years, the notice might be 10 weeks. You have to pay 10 weeks if you walk them out the door. Right? It's
Okay.
actually a chart in the Employment Standards Act. Letting someone go. Now, if you let someone go for the wrong reasons, okay? Let's say you sexually harassed them and they rejected your advances and you fired them. Then they could hire a lawyer, take it to court. You would mostly be found to be at fault for wrongful termination. And in wrongful termination cases, the ballpark is being awarded 1 month's pay for each year of service. So if somebody's been working for you for 20 years, that's a lot of money. As long you do not have to provide a reason, you're under no legal obligation to provide a reason to let somebody go without notice. And in fact, it's safer not to give them a reason. I let the person who was running my company go And they were very upset, but I refused to give them a reason. I just said it's not in the best interest. Now, the reality was there was a lot of conflict happening at the office. Um, so, but you know, that gives you, hopefully that helps.
Absolutely, absolutely, definitely clears things up. I definitely wasn't aware that you can give somebody leave without cause. I know there had to be some kind of explanation for some closure, but I appreciate that. I guess a quick follow up on that would be, I've been employed before, and in regards to just not being told anything and then not being scheduled for a shift once for one of the companies. I worked at multiple companies. I have a lot of story, which is why probably my brain is pretty explosive with what is right and what is wrong. But if you just stop scheduling somebody, one of your employees, that is, how does that work out?
Ultimately, at some point, you're going to owe them what's called an ROE, a record of employment. My suggestion is, if you don't plan on having them back, is to issue an ROE. So this is under your payroll number. It used to be a carbon paper form, but now it's all done online. Now, it requires a reason. So you could put down, check the box for cause. I would never in Canada recommend you fire anyone for cause. It is never a good idea. When you fire somebody for cause, you're saying they deserved it. But the employment law and case law is structured in such a way that the bar is extremely high for saying somebody deserved to get fired. Basically, you know, you should have 5 warnings and the person should be, you know, in prison awaiting trial before you'd even consider. It's just cheaper and safer to always do it without cause. Then you pay them their lieu of notice. If it's for cause, you don't owe them, you just owe them what they worked. You don't owe them lieu of notice. So when you do somebody, let somebody go without cause, you could let them go because shortage of work. Basically, you know, there's not enough work to go around. I've never used that. I always put in reason K, which is other, and use a vague term called position eliminated due to restructuring. The reason why I do that is, if I have a hiring grant, and by the way, this is not legal advice. I am not an employment law lawyer, but this is what I've done for 15 years. If there's a hiring grant, they'll say, hey, you can't use a hiring grant to hire people while letting people go for shortage of work. That's inappropriate. So that's why I've never just said, oh, we don't have enough work for you. It's I just use this other reason that the CRA allows, and they may call you and ask you about it, and you just say, you know what, the role that they had doesn't exist anymore.
Great, thanks for clarifying.
My pleasure. Does anyone else have any questions on that? Any follow-up questions, or by all means take us to another subject?
Hey, Jeff, it's Chris calling. Just had a question about contractors. So if you have them under as a contractor as opposed to an employee, then how does that differ?
So when you're hiring someone as a contractor, you're saying that they are a company. So they're either going to be a sole proprietor or a corporation, and you're going to pay them just like you would any other, like you'd pay your cell phone bill, right? They invoice you and you pay them an amount. You need to read the CRA guidance on independent contractors. So in order for someone to be considered an independent contractor, there's if I remember the 4 items of the test. To hire somebody as a contractor, ideally they should be providing their own tools. They should be setting their own hours. They should have independent control over their work, and they should be taking on risk. And I'm sort of paraphrasing from the CRA guidance on this. You can find it on the website. So if you just Google CRA independent contractor rules, you'll find it. So let's just run through a quick example. If I hire a neighbor for $20 to cut my grass, so they get to decide when they cut the grass. They're providing their own tools as the lawnmower. They're free to cut other people's grass, right? It's clear this is an independent contractor. It's a classic example. But let's say I have a massive property, too big to cut the grass, even with a couple of days. So I hire someone and I say, I'm hiring you as an independent contractor. I want you to show up at 8:30 every day. You're going to use my lawnmower. You're going to cut this section of grass on Monday, this section on Tuesday, this section on Wednesday. And I don't want you cutting grass for anyone else. That is an employee. They're not an independent contractor. And the CRA has been cracking down. And just on the budget that they announced today, they're continuing to crack down on individuals who are employees being declared being called independent contractors.
And sorry, just as a follow-up, so it has nothing to do with the amount of hours. So let's say that they're working for you for 2 hours, but they're set hours, like at 5:30 on Tuesday, Thursday. As soon as you set that schedule, then they're automatically an employee then in the eyes of the CRA?
No, it's a multi-factor test. So if I go see my personal trainer, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 p.m., no one would claim that they are an employee of mine. The safest way to know somebody will not be declared an employee is if they're a corporation. If they're a corporation, then that's out the window. If they're actually, it's to your advantage. If they're doing a small number of hours, if they're doing 2 hours every second day, then they look like a contractor. It's when they do 9 to 5 Monday to Friday in front of your computer that you provided and you manage them on a day-to-day basis. We would all look at that and say they look like employees.
Okay, thank you.
It's not a cut and fast, straightforward. It's more of a gut feeling. So if the CRA ever looked at it, you're making the case that this person's an independent contractor. The big advantage to hiring an independent contractor is you don't need to set up payroll. You don't need to do payroll tax remissions, remittances. You just say, hey, I'm going to pay you this much to do this, and you're off to the races. But you need to be careful, because if you treat someone that way and they are declared an employee, as a company, you are going to owe all of the CPP and EI contributions back to when they started working for you. I don't know if there could be punitive penalties, but they will not take kindly. You could always approach CRA and say, hey, listen, this is the circumstance. What do you think? Having individuals provide their own equipment, if they work for multiple people, those are some often clear indications that they're more of an independent contractor.
Okay, thank you.
Any follow-up questions? So I see one here. So talking about a core team. So I built my company up and I have a wonderful team at my company. It's so wonderful, in fact, that I haven't met many of them. The individual who's running the company is free to make hiring decisions, and I trust them implicitly to run the company. So when you're looking at developing a team, one thought that I would throw out there, just gonna see where I joined. There we go. Is there's two extremes. You have micromanaged employees. These are employees that you need to keep motivated and you need to be involved in their day-to-day work. And then we have independent thinkers at the other end of the spectrum, who are quite happy to make decisions on their own. And as entrepreneurs, I would imagine many of you would think right off the bat, oh, I want independent thinkers. I don't want to have to be involved in micromanaging them. But the reality is, it depends on the kind of work that you have. If I am running a fast food restaurant and I have people working in a line putting burgers together, I don't want independent thinkers who are going to change the recipe, who are going to make burgers differently, who are going to decide, oh, I need to cook these fries a bit longer because they taste better that way. I don't want independent thinkers when you have a clear job. And also independent thinkers, they tend to be abrasive because they will challenge you. That could be a good thing, or it can be a disaster. So that is the micromanage end of the spectrum, are employees that just come to work and do what they're told. But if they're not told what to do, they don't do anything. So I suggest you think about how you want your team to work. I built a very independent team. What that also means is very often I am servicing the employees. The employees don't work for me. I basically work for the employees. I'm there to help them do their jobs. It really turns things on its head. So you need to think about what kind of employees. Do you want somebody who's, very independent? Can anybody offer some thoughts on that line of reasoning?
I guess since I asked the question, I think that does make sense. It's only just I'm starting to now realize or recognize that there are like multiple levels even within the team where, yes, you have some who are the micromanaged because you ask for them to do certain things and then you just check in on how that's going and if they have any questions. But then it would be nice to have sort of the independent aspects as well, just because they are confident or well equipped in the skills that they bring, whether it's on, the finance side or any other aspect of the venture. But then that's where the challenge is how do you go about bringing them on when, as a startup, the funding or some aspect of it is a bit tight. And so it's almost like you choose which one to focus on. And if there's, say, funding available, it's more the micromanaged side of things that are moving along. And so I think that's where I'm at in sort of juggling which aspects to now focus on while other things are working well.
Absolutely. Funding is a challenge. The independent thinkers tend to demand more money, demand more in general. Think about yourself working for someone else. You know what you're worth. You want to be paid for it. You also, when you have independent thinkers, need to keep in mind that you need to support your employees. When you enable employees to make decisions, then you have to back them up with those decisions, even if they don't make a decision that you like. I had someone running my company who changed my product's name and the logo to something I really didn't like. But because I gave them the mandate to run the company, I had to support them 100%. And if a customer asked me what I thought of it, I was like, I think it's wonderful. So you need to, when you do give employees the authority to make decisions, you have to back them up when they make those decisions. Otherwise, you are, do whatever you want, and then they make a decision, and then you're like, but not that. It's not fair to the employees.
Hey, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Sure. My question is about, what should I say, building a team. Recently, I was able to get 2 people on board for a project that I'm working on, and working on some like legal stuff as well. Now, my question is, when you sort of have a team, how do you have that, should I say, get together or building and communication? Any tips and tricks for sort of like making things together?
Yes, this is particularly a challenge, and we had a similar question already with COVID. My company runs on a instant messaging platform called Flock, but there's lots of them out there. Keeping the lines of communication open and setting up something like a standing meeting twice a week, just to get together, catch up. When you're not in the same physical space, it's easy to not know what's going on. And trying to create that community when we are physically apart and try not to keep us socially apart is a challenge. So, when you're building that team, I think it's important to have clear understandings on the legal side. Who owns what. As if you're bringing on partners with equity stake in your company, I would highly recommend that you think about things like a shotgun clause. This is, and there's other clauses like it that address how you would go about breaking up the company, breaking up the partnership. When I started my company, I hired one of my friends away from another company, but he never received equity in the company. So it was always clear that I owned the company and he was a contractor, and then eventually an employee, and then eventually a contractor again. So I think it's important to have those conversations early. A lot of times there's injustice in terms of stringing along partners or individuals that think they're partners in the business but don't have legal standing as a partner. People shouldn't receive legal equity unless they're giving something up and taking on some risk. But if they're working for free, it would be inappropriate for them to be left out of the value built in the company. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah.
My team is
Hey, Geoff,
actually,
Nick here.
Oh, go
Just
ahead.
want to elaborate on what you mentioned there. I love how you said, so I've gone through a Indeed campaign among other campaigns, and I was able to find abundance amount of people who were interested in multiple positions I was offering. And I met an independent thinker, and it was actually quite, like you said, abrasive in terms of the ideas, very cerebral thinking, and definitely a conversation that lasted, 2-3 hours because of the amount of productivity we got on that hour. And right away, I knew that
I'm just having some sound problems.
was going to be somebody sent to the next phase. So
I'm sorry, Nick, I'm having trouble. I wonder if it's just me or if it's everyone.
Yeah, I can't hear him on my side either.
Okay.
let me know if this is better.
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. So just going through the motions of taking on independent thinker as my first core team member, and they did mention, the pay structure and the comp plan. Do you have any advice when it comes to deciding on a pay rate and a projected comp plan?
That's a challenge, but it's extremely important. A couple of things that I would say are, if you put yourselves in their shoes, if they're not working, that's one thing, but if they are working and you're hiring them away from an existing job, they're going to have minimum pay, obligations in their own life and how much money they need to be paid. So they have some number in their head of the minimum amount of compensation that they need. You need to meet that. Beyond that, it's very easy to give pay raises. You can't take pay raises back. And you can't lower compensation. You can go, everybody's happy if you go up, but you cannot go down. So my suggestion is to try and start low and say, listen, after 3 months, we'll plan for a 10% pay increase. Also, indexing it to performance is valuable. And generally, independent thinkers will not shy away from that because they believe in themselves and that they will bring the revenue to the company. There is some hesitation on purely commission-based pay because it can incentivize risky behavior and not necessarily being in your customer's best interest. But does that help?
Yeah, it does for sure. And I guess since it's really truly case by case situational, what would be your suggestion, or who should we seek advice from in regard, aside from a lawyer, in regard to drafting a comp plan?
I've generally not used a lawyer, just the odd time. You have an offer letter and then an employment contract, and often a code of conduct. So very often people are employed just solely based off of a offer letter, and there's not really much more than that. If all you provide is an offer letter, that becomes their employment contract. The things that you want to look out for is, total compensation that they're receiving, expectations, property ownership. You may, if you have an independent thinker, want to look at a non-solicitation clause, which is like a non-compete clause. So in Canada, generally, you can't just say, hey, this person's not allowed to work in this industry. That's considered too broad. But a non-solicitation clause saying they can't hire away your employees or contact your customers is quite reasonable. So those are some things that I would suggest.
Sorry, Jeff, to clarify, is that non-solicitation clause for employees or contractors as well?
You can use it for both.
Okay.
So traditionally, the strongest language you could put in is a non-compete clause. I'm in a small town. There's no restaurants. I build this wonderful Italian bistro, and I hire a chef. And I say to them, you are not allowed to work as a chef in this town. The courts would throw that out because everyone's entitled to make a living. He moves to the community, he works for me, it doesn't work out. There's nothing preventing him from working as a chef. Where a non-solicitation clause is narrower in focus is specifically saying, don't poach my employees or my customers. So you want to make your protection in a non-compete, non-solicitation clause more narrow so that it's more enforceable. You would never want to hire an employee and then they gain all of this knowledge, they know all your customers, they have good relationship, and they leave and then call them all up and say, come with me. Well, that would be solicitation. Same thing goes if they leave and take all your best employees. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Additional questions? So I do have something I would throw out there, and this is kind of a conceited statement, but as you're hiring, keep in mind that you're not likely to find individuals as motivated and as adaptable as you are. The reality is, if they are as motivated and adaptable as you are, they probably went and started their own company. So at some point, some of the work that you're doing, you will always be the best at it. I was always the best salesperson for my company. But I had to hire salespeople to turn it into a company that I could step away from. So you're going to have to find that balance. You want to maintain integrity and hold everyone to a high standard, but don't think for a moment that you're going to get the perfection that you expect out of all of your employees, and just be ready for that.
Hi, Job. I would like to ask regarding your statement there. Margaret here.
Yep.
Yes. How would you tell that? How would you communicate that to them early on? Like, if it's possible, do their job like accurately right away, so we have no problems later on.
Yes. So first of all, leading by example. So when you're doing the work, performing it to the level that you expect your employees to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That uh, that sounds kind of simple, but I would go into the office and it would bother me how messy the office was, and then I'd realize, well, half of the mess at the office is my fault, and they're just modeling my behavior. So definitely modeling the behavior that you'd like to see from your employees is very
Mm-hmm.
important. And then giving clear examples and expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Back to our fast food example, um, someone who goes in to cook at McDonald's has been trained to know exactly what to do, follow, do this, do this, do this. And in those micromanaged level situations, there is very clear examples on what to do.
Uh-huh.
Um, Very often, mature companies have policies and procedures and a operating manual that explains how to do everything. When you start, you don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
So once an employee asks you the same question twice, it's time to put it in the operating manual so that when new employees come on, you're looking for a very straightforward guide of how to do the work and
Mm-hmm.
what level to do the work.
Right.
I make fun of Office Space. If you haven't watched it, it's an older movie, but it's um, you will appreciate it in
I'll check
that
it.
there's lots of steps to do. You didn't fill in the TP7 form, right? So um, to get your company to a well-oiled machine, it
Uh-huh.
needs to be designed to be a well-oiled machine,
Right.
and do the same things consistently the same way every time.
Correct.
When we start off, it's kind of, somebody wants to know how much it costs. Oh, I better create a quote.
Mm-hmm.
And then you create a template and you put all the information into it and you email it off to them. Well, where do you keep the quotes? And, a lot of your time should be turning your business into that well-oiled machine where you're starting to figure out how are we going to go about doing things so
Mm-hmm.
that they're efficient.
Correct. Yes, but I understand. Yeah, but you when you hire a specialist, well, you kind of expect them to be like better than you, right? Because they specialize on that.
Yes, normally they will be extremely knowledgeable in that area, but not necessarily um, have the adaptability to deal with everything. As the owner of a business, you are the catch-all and the ultimate decision maker. And I do recommend that when you have a subject matter expert that knows more than you do,
Mm-hmm.
um, then often you're going to defer to their recommendations, but it still has to come to you for a decision. I had a developer that I've already mentioned that was working for me who would come to me and present a decision.
Good.
Ultimately,
Yes.
he would make a recommendation, and I would always go with the recommendation, but it was still had to be presented to me as a decision.
Mm-hmm. I see. I see.
Hopefully that helps.
Yes. Yes. Yes, it does. Yeah. Thank you.
So any additional questions from anyone?
Mhm.
Hi, is it okay if I jump in and ask a question?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Awesome. Hi, I'm sorry I had another meeting before, so I've arrived a bit late, but maybe you did answer this before. Um, Building a team, I'm finding, is like my literal biggest challenge in starting an organization, because and so my question comes around to we've been around for a year, and there's like building for now in like needing to like scale and build the organization. And then there's hiring also for people that you want to be around for the longer term, right? And I have a hard time kind of identifying how best to do that without kind of an analysis paralysis scenario. So for example, there's definitely a role that I know is like core to the business that we do, that I don't want to just have come in. I know that they need to be around. They're like our primary stakeholder relations person. That is not something that you contract for 3 months and then they go away, especially in terms of the nature of my organization, which is parents and kids are the primary users. So how do you balance that with, I need someone in place now, but not being too afraid to take that risk, I guess, knowing that they need to be around for a long time?
Well, first of all, I would caution you, like, you want to hire someone thinking they're going to be around forever. But none of my employees that I started with are still around. Now, my first employee eventually started his own company and works for me as a contractor now. And actually, he has employees that he subcontracts to me. But you, just as much as you might bring somebody on who doesn't work out because they don't live up, you're going to have people who don't stick around because they exceed. And I've very often had employees. I brought on one employee for a sales and marketing position, and about a week in, I'm like, I hope we can keep her 6 months, because she spoke 6 languages and she had her master's and she was absolutely brilliant. And here we are paying her barely more than minimum wage, and she's driving an hour to get here. There's no way we could keep this person. There's not enough growth and not enough possibility. So I would suggest that, hire someone that you think is going to work, but just as much as they might not work out because they don't live up to the needs, they may not work out because they exceed the needs. And that is something we often don't think about.
Okay. That's really helpful. And can I ask just one more question?
Absolutely.
Just coming back to your policy and procedures, when you're starting an organization, you've got like maybe 1-2 staff, and like, how important is it to come up with those policies and procedures? It's such as like, when do you cross over into that, coming up with the policy and procedures? And then, sorry, I'm going to ask, and then this is kind of, it bridges onto that and ties in with the other question, is when I am hiring one new person, I kind of want someone who's a collaborator versus someone I have to manage too, right? So it feels like these are kind of same side of same side of the coin, or whatever it might be. Yeah, so it might be 2 questions, but it's one. I don't want to manage anyone at this time. I want someone who can run with it. When do you start putting these policies and procedures in place? And then also, how do you manage or not manage, get employees that are more collaborative?
So on the policies and procedures, I sat down with a friend of mine, and I was like 2 months in, didn't even have my first customer, and said to him, like, I don't have any policies or procedures. And it was like, doesn't seem like the right time. Like, it's, why would I spend all my time writing policies and procedures when I should be doing sales so that this keeps going? And then you turn around and it's 5 years later, and you don't have any policies and procedures, and you have 14 employees. I would suggest, when something comes up, you're not just going to do all of your policies and procedures at once. You're going to make guides, how to do something, how to deal with this, how to deal with that. And I would suggest when you encounter something that's come up a second time, unless you will be occasionally required to have policies and procedures because of insurance requirements, that, your insurance company might say, hey, do you have a policy and procedure for, losing a client, as in like physically you're caring for someone and you lost them in the woods. They might tell you have to have a policy and procedure for that. But aside from that, you want to create those to save yourself time. So if every new employee, you have to explain you spend one day explaining, well, just take that one day of explaining, spend that day documenting that day of explaining, and hand them the book, and then spend half an hour answering their questions at the end of it. So really the policies and procedures are about making sure people do things the same way and that things are more efficient. So hopefully that's some guidance there, unless of course the insurance company makes you do it. On the side of, independent, so I brought up earlier on, employees that you need to micromanage versus independent thinkers. I built my company out of independent employees, but 9 out of 10 I hired did not work out. And this is kind of the idea of, MVP, fail fast. I wouldn't hesitate to let employees go. It is in their best interest and your best interest and the company's best interest. The moment you start doubting whether an employee should work for you, everything else seems, in my experience, seems to reinforce that they don't belong there. And as soon as I started having doubts of whether I should have this employee, just, I hate to say it, but cut out the cancer and move on. Let them go, reassure your other employees it just wasn't working out, and move on.
That's really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't be afraid to hire people, but I wouldn't be afraid to fire people. And if somebody doesn't work out, I've had people cry. I've had people argue, letting them go, but it's your right. You can let any employee go, and just, it's really hard to tell. Maybe I'm just too much of an optimist because I would interview someone and then hire them and then look back at it going, what was I thinking? So don't be afraid to hire people on, give them a chance. And then if it doesn't work out, let them go and move on.
Thank you.
One of the questions here, when I say independent employees, do I mean contractors that you outsource work to? So I was referring to independent thinking employees. So I try to describe it as a spectrum in that you have employees that will sit at their desk and do nothing unless you tell them what they need to do. And then you have these very independent thinking, self-starting employees who are always looking for work and trying to make things better. As entrepreneurs, you're very often thinking, well, those independent thinkers are the best kind of employees. And the reality is they're not. It depends on what your situation is, and you want somewhere on that spectrum, because those very independent thinkers tend to tell you you're doing things wrong. They're happy to share your opinion. They're happy to tell you, what they think of you. They are not happy with the status quo. They want things to change. You could sit down and design a new process and they immediately tell you what they think is wrong with it. And that can be difficult to deal with. So trying to find that balance. You want people who can work on generally you want people that can work on their own, but it depends on what you're doing. If I'm hiring an assistant to work at my hot dog stand, I don't want an independent thinker telling me about new recipes for my hot dogs. I just want them to do what I say. Hopefully that helps. Thank you, Noreen, for the message there. Being honest and upfront in the recruitment and selection process. Absolutely. I would caution you, if you're hiring an employee who is not currently working, then I would say go for it and look into hiring subsidies. There's quite a few hiring subsidies out there. If you hire someone away from, that's been working at a company 25 years and they quit that job to come and work for you and it doesn't work out, there may be legal obligation on you if you were not honest when you hired them on. So I can't remember the exact terminology from an employment law point of view, but I was always much quicker to hire unemployed individuals to give them a chance at my company. Hiring somebody away from a good, well-paying job to work for you, you need to be sure that you're going to have the funding, right? You don't want to hire somebody away from a great, wonderful, high-paying job to then run out of funding and let them go because you can't pay them and they can't go back to the job that they had. So one of the questions that came in, recommendations on wage subsidies for non-students. So either newly graduated or older than 30. I would probably refer you to the roundup, Edge's roundup email that goes out. I'm a little bit out of touch because I haven't hired an employee in a while, but the Ontario government has employment centers, and there's a list of employment centers on the Ontario government website. So that will list, I know the one in my local area is called VPI, but I think the one in Milton is called the Skills Center. The one in Georgetown is called VPI, but and actually Sheridan itself is one of those agencies in terms of the job finding club and the job boards through Sheridan. So have a look at the Ontario website and always be on the lookout for grants. They're constantly changing. The best grant I ever got paid 75% of 12 weeks pay. And I had 3 employees that I hired under that program. And then some of the other programs that I had paid far less. So beware. My suggestion is contact the employment agencies first before you tell them you have an employee that you're hiring, and find out they may want a prospective employee to be intaked through their program before they're eligible for a subsidy. So let's see if I can be clear on this. I meet someone, they are wonderful, and I want to hire them on, but I want a wage subsidy. So I would not extend an offer letter. I would contact the employment agency, the local one that I deal with, and say, I have someone I think would be wonderful for your program. And, they also could be somebody that we might be consider hiring if we could get some help with subsidy. Very often, if you've already extended an offer, a job offer, some of the employment subsidies no longer apply. They only apply if they are approved before the employment offer is put out.
So it's essentially to their graduates who are going through their program?
Well, their program is really like how to write a resume, right? Like it could be like a 20-minute program. It is not like they get intaked as in, let's figure out who you are. Let's help you with your resume. Let's see if you have any barriers to employment. If somebody's physically disabled, if somebody's experienced employment challenges, there's different subsidies. I received higher subsidies for one employee because of their barriers to employment. So the key part is talk to the employment agency before, right off the bat, before you even have somebody you'd like to hire. They will provide you resumes of people in their system. Very often I would find people on my own and say to them, using, very specific language, I think you should apply to this employment organization because that would be a wonderful idea and I'd like you to work here.
Okay, great. Okay.
So,
And okay. And thanks for the links on the chat window, by the way.
that wasn't me. That's that's the other
Yes,
Edge
you,
staff.
Noreen and Edge staff. Sorry, I forget your name.
Yes, they're the helpful ones behind the scene, putting in all the wonderful links. Additional questions. These are, first of all, this has been wonderful. Please keep your questions coming. This has been a great session so far.
Hi, can I ask another question?
Absolutely.
Done here. I know you've just offered some resources on how to different wage subsidies and possibly hiring people that are unemployed. As a startup organization, I want to work with people that are familiar with being in a startup organization. It's just like a completely different pace of working. Also, as a founder, I have my own quirks, and so what I've been wanting to do, or my recruitment process has been a lot of word of mouth, but it's like kind of drying up here. And so how do you recruit to find people that can work in a startup environment along with, you're the founder and you kind of want to be able to accelerate and move with people in an efficient way. So yeah, finding the right people for a startup environment as well.
A few suggestions there. And first of all, I think it's wonderful that you recognize you have your own quirks, and think about that when you're thinking about the impact on your employees. So one of the things that I would say is, your traditional Indeed job board can be very valuable because it's basically free advertising. But you can put a very quirky job posting there to get very quirky applicants. Another thing that I would suggest is thinking about individuals that would face traditional barriers to employment that you can accommodate. So you maybe have someone who's looking to return to the workforce part-time. Traditionally, individuals looking to return to the workforce part-time face barriers to employment. It's kind of, ironic, maybe isn't the best words for it, but we have many individuals who have multiple part-time jobs because they can't get one full-time job. And then we have other individuals who want part-time work, but the only work that they can find is full-time. So there are lots of wonderful employees that experience barriers. And as an independent thinker and an entrepreneur, you can look past those barriers and work with an individual at the place that they're at. That may be an additional resource.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Additional questions? Those have all been great, and we have time for probably 2-3 more questions.
Hey Jeff, Nick here. So maybe we can discuss recruiting, discussing your opinion when it comes to hiring multiple part-time or one full-time, or one or two full-time. The question is more directed towards obviously fulfilling the position you need, but maybe different personalities will do a better job with different tasks. Or if you're more if you think it's better to focus on one individual at a time and kind of train them along what they find themselves strong at, and then outsource the rest until you're able to truly have 2 full-time employees versus 2 part-time.
That's tough. I've generally not had part-time roles at my company, like full-time roles, even though there's some flexibility. Your advantages to having multiple employees, ultimately any of your employees could leave at any moment. So having a single, hiring 2 part-time employees versus 1 full-time employee, if you have 1 full-time employee, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, in that this one individual, if it's a great fit and they stay with the company, it'll be more efficient than having 2 part-time employees. But you are increasing the risk that they may not choose to continue along for the ride. So those are my initial thoughts. There's no impact from a funding basis. I would actually suggest you post the job as both a full-time job and a part-time job, because you do have individuals who are looking for part-time work, especially if it's a physically present job. Particularly millennials, a lot more, many more individuals are pushing back against 9-to-5 jobs. They want to work when they want to work. That can be for personal reasons. They're taking care of kids. They're taking care of family members. They want work-life balance. But my honest recommendation is to post it as both, either 2 job postings or 1 job posting, and base it around the individuals. I think you can very much customize work. They could take on work that you were thinking you'd still do yourself, but they're great at it, and you can pick up the slack for something that they don't have the skills for. That's a great question. Additional questions? Just doing a little time check. Yep.
I guess I'll continue the conversation with you, Geoff, here, and
Go ahead.
ask you a pretty broad but good question. What would be like your tips when it comes to starting with an employee? We mentioned a lot about ethics and setting expectations, but how did you find success in the first month or so with your newest employee with no knowledge of who they were before you hired them?
Honestly, my first experience was pretty lackluster. And maybe 75% of my experiences were lackluster. Maybe I'm just particularly horrible at interviewing and hiring, but most of my experiences were not positive. Now, I had employees that might have made it a couple of years and some that didn't make the 1 month mark. At some point, you just need to take, like entrepreneurship, you need to take the leap of faith, look at someone that you think is going to be good and go for it. And you're not going to know until, they start working, whether it is going to work out or not. So, but the best source of employees was always people I had worked with before.
Yeah, I bet that's for sure. It's hard to know people before you know them, right? Now that being said, how did you pivot if you had to? You said you were in IT, so probably didn't have to, but how would you pivot if you needed to in regards to COVID-19? And I personally like in person. I much prefer that when it comes to collaborations. But how should someone pivot today? What have you seen success stories in regards to small businesses that probably had an office at one point or kept the office and now have to stay at home but are still able to work? What do you suggest in the situation now?
So I have two very different experiences with my two primary companies. So my software company that I spend most of my time talking about, because it started in 2008. It's just continued on as if nothing happened. All of the customers are all remote. The employees already often worked remotely, and it wasn't even a hiccup. The business didn't see any material change, because when you're used to working with your customers remotely, oh no, we have to work remotely. Well, we've been doing that for 13 years. So for that business, there wasn't a pivot. For my scuba business, it has had huge impact. 2019 was basically when I launched the company. It did quite well for a startup in its first year. A little bit more of a lifestyle business, right? It's not not your traditional sort of money-making venture. Last year with COVID was worse than my first year. And this year I'm hoping to at least match last year. There's always opportunities. No, I can't go to public swimming pools and teach people to scuba dive, but when we're not in the stay-at-home order, I can go teach people in their backyard pools, and they can't travel. So this has created opportunities in different ways. Trying to think through how the market is changing. There's constant changes in technology and demographics, in situations and government, regulation that create opportunity, and trying to stay upbeat and focus that way. If you had a business selling weight training equipment when COVID hit, your problem would be being too busy rather than not busy enough. But if you had a luxury travel business, you would be in awful shape. So hopefully that helps. Okay. So there's a message there from Noreen. For any of you that are not members of Edge, I would highly recommend that you check it out. Edge is a wonderful space to encourage opportunity and growth. I work there as a mentor, as well as many other mentors with different areas of specialty. So we'd love to have you. If you're not already a member, come and check out Edge.
Geoff, you mentioned these employment centers that are located throughout Ontario, specifically VPI. What are the expectations when setting a meeting with them? What are we? What's the objective, or what's the objective you would recommend that we try to get out of them?
When you're meeting with them, find the one in your local area. So it'll probably be called something different, and just be honest with them. They're there to help get people working, and you're trying to hire people. So this is a match made in heaven. They will love you if you're like, hey, I need to hire people, and they're like, great, we have people that need jobs. So just be honest and upfront. They may occasionally try to get you to hire someone that has been with them for 3 years trying to find a job. If it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. The hiring decision is yours, but they're there. Their sole purpose is to get the residents of Ontario who want jobs working, and they get funding to help. So I think that's it for time today. If I notice the slide change, that's probably my hint, my subtle hint that it's time to wrap up.
Thank you so much for having this informative session. If there's no more questions, I guess we can end it early. But thank you everyone for joining. For me, I learned so much. I'm in HR, so it's very informative for me. But I hope you guys found it helpful as well. I share some links in the chat. Edge events, also a Mentor Monday feedback form. We love to hear feedback, and also our Edge programs. So if you're new to Edge, check us out. And thank you for joining again. Bye, guys.
Thanks, Geoff. Let your little message there. Looking for additional help whenever